All right, so let's try a little thought experiment.
Okay, I'm with you.
If I say the words American royalty, I mean, the real Gilded Age, gold-plated, old money aristocracy, what's a first name that really pops into your head?
Well, a lot of people might say Rockefeller, maybe the Kennedys, depending on how you define it.
Right, right. Those are the usual suspects. But there's one name that
Yeah.
it is the Gilded Age.
Right.
It's the name that screams excess and these insane palaces on Fifth Avenue.
You have to be talking about the Vanderbilts.
The Vanderbilts, exactly.
Heck yeah.
I mean, even the name itself sounds heavy, right? It sounds like steel and railroads and mahogany.
It does. It has a weight to it.
But here's the thing that I found so fascinating prepping for this. We have this image of them as the ultimate establishment, the insiders. But the real story is, it's the complete opposite.
Oh, it's not a polite story at all.
No, it's a story about, street brawls and shipping wars and pirates.
Yeah.
Literally pirates.
It's the definitive American arc, really. It's almost Shakespearean when you look at the structure of it.
How so?
Well, you have the ascent, which is just incredibly gritty and frankly, violent in a business sense. Then you have the peak, this almost manic desperation to build monuments to themselves.
And then the fall.
And then the fall. And it happens so much faster than anyone could have possibly predicted.
And that part is just as fascinating, if not more so, than the rise. We're going to get into all of it. The economics, the insane architecture, the personalities.
Yeah.
Because this one family, they gave us, the New York Central Railroad.
The Whitney Museum.
A game of bridge.
Yep.
And, Anderson Cooper.
The Anderson-Cooper connection is always the one that gets people. It's a great piece of trivia, but it makes perfect sense when you actually trace the family line.
It does. So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to map the entire trajectory. How in the world do you go from being an indentured servant on a Diggs farm
Which is a key detail.
to becoming, for a time, the richest man in human history, and then all the way down the line to a CNN anchor? And, the big question, where did $200 billion in today's money just disappear?
To understand where the money went, you absolutely have to understand where it came from. And that means going back a lot further than most people think. We're not starting in the Gilded Age.
No, we need to go back to the 1600s, to a very, very different New York.
New York that was still New Netherland.
Yeah, that deep roots section in the research,
Yeah.
It honestly made me laugh out loud. Because my mental image of a Vanderbilt is, a guy in a top hat, maybe a monocle.
Sure. The Monopoly man, basically.
Exactly. But the progenitor, the very first guy on American soil,
Mm-hmm.
he was definitely not wearing a monocle.
No, not even close. His name was Jan Artsoen, or sometimes you see it written as Artson.
Okay.
And he was, to put it simply, a farmer. He came from this tiny little village in the Netherlands in the province of Utrecht called De Bilt.
And deal is the key. That's the light bulb moment.
That's the whole thing right there. Because in the Dutch naming custom of that time, Vanderbilt wasn't a surname like we think of it. It just meant from the Bilt.
So it was a location descriptor.
Exactly. It was like saying Bill from Boston. It wasn't a noble name. It was just a label. And then, over time, as the English took over, that space gets closed up, it gets anglicized, and it becomes the one word Vanderbilt.
But when he shows up in 1650, he's not arriving as some grand colonist.
He's the opposite. He arrived as an indentured servant.
Let's just pause on that for a second. An indentured servant. So the great whatever grandfather of American aristocracy began his American journey as essentially property.
That's right. He was bound by contract. He had to work for the Van Couwenhoven family just to pay off the cost of his passage on the ship.
It's so critical to the story because it completely strips away all the pretension that comes later. This was not a family that brought noble blood from Europe.
They were the help. They started at absolute zero. In fact, they started in the negative because he owed labor from day one.
But the story of their ancestry gets even stranger. And this is the part that feels like it's been deliberately scrubbed from the official buttoned-up histories because it just doesn't fit the brand.
Ah, yes. You're talking about the pirate connection.
The pirate connection, it sounds like something from a movie.
It really does. But the genealogy is pretty clear. If you trace the family line back through the Commodore's great-great-grandmother, a woman named Abigail Sefford,
Okay.
you eventually hit a man named Anthony Janzoen van Saley. Now, Anthony was a real character in 17th century New Amsterdam. He was a major landowner. He was wealthy, but he was always seen as an outsider.
Why?
Well, the historical documents from that time describe him as tawny.
Tawny, which is 1600s code for What exactly?
Not purely Northern European. Mixed race, or at the very least dark-complected enough that he stood out among all the pale Dutch colonists.
Okay, so where does that come from?
His mother was of Berber origin, from Cartagena in Spain. But his father is the wild card. His father was a man named Jan Janzoon.
And let me guess, Jan Janzoon was not a farmer.
Jan Janzoon was the president of the Republic of Salé.
Which sounds very official and presidential.
It sounds perfectly legitimate until you realize that the Republic of Salé was a city-state on the coast of Morocco run by pirates.
A pirate republic.
A pirate republic. Jan Janzoon was a Dutchman who had turned Turk, as they said. He became a pirate, converted to Islam, took the name Murat Reis, and became one of the most feared Barbary corsairs in the Mediterranean.
They're kidding me.
Not at all. He was capturing European ships, raiding coastlines, taking hostages for ransom, the whole 9 yards.
So, just to get this timeline straight in my head, the Vanderbilts, the family that would later build these incredibly ornate ballrooms and literally refused to let new money families in because their blood wasn't pure enough.
Yes.
They had the actual DNA of a Barbary pirate king flowing through their veins.
Biologically, yes, it's there. And, you can almost argue there's a temperamental connection there, too, a certain ruthlessness.
Right.
Because when we fast forward to the man who builds the fortune, Cornelius Vanderbilt, the Commodore, he didn't operate like a polite businessman. He operated like a corsair. He just traded the Mediterranean for the Hudson River.
Let's go there. Let's get to the Commodore. Cornelius Vanderbilt, born 1794, Staten Island. This is the man who changes absolutely everything. But again, to your point, not a polished guy.
Not in the slightest. He was rough. He was crude. He was the fourth of 9 kids in a family that was just barely scraping by. He dropped out of school at age 11.
11. That's just, I can't even imagine. That's barely middle school today.
He was functionally illiterate for a huge chunk of his early life. I mean, he learned enough to do his sums and sign contracts, but his spelling was famously awful, completely phonetic. He didn't read books. He read river currents. He read his competition.
And he starts with what? One boat.
One single boat, a small, flat-bottomed sailing vessel called a periauger. He borrowed $100 from his mother to buy it, and he just started ferrying people and cargo from Staten Island to the tip of Manhattan.
And this is where the nickname comes from, right? The Commodore. It's not like the Navy gave it to him.
No, it was almost a joke at first. People started calling him that because a Commodore is a naval rank, an officer in charge of a squadron. And here's this kid, just so aggressive and energetic, barking orders at other boatmen, cutting people off, hustling for every single fare.
So they were kind of mocking him.
They were. They called him Commodore, half-jokingly. But he completely owned it. He embraced it. And he grew into that title until it wasn't a joke anymore. It was a statement of pure dominance.
Let's talk about that dominance, because when you read about his early business career, it's not dry financial history. It's basically a series of street fights and legal brawls. And the biggest one was against Robert Fulton.
This is a really pivotal moment in American legal history, not just business history. Robert Fulton, the inventor of the steamboat, he and his business partner, Robert Livingston, had been granted a legal monopoly by the state of New York.
A monopoly on what?
A monopoly on all steamboat traffic in New York waters. If you wanted to run a steamboat, you had to pay them or you couldn't operate. It was a complete lock on the industry.
That seems insane today. Can you imagine if the government said only one company is allowed to make smartphones?
Exactly. It completely stifled competition, and it made travel and shipping incredibly expensive. But Cornelius Vanderbilt did not care about a law if that law stood between him and a profit.
So what did he do?
At the time, he was working for a guy named Thomas Gibbons, running a ferry from New Jersey to New York. And Vanderbilt basically turned into a blockade runner. He'd race a steamboat into New York Harbor, drop off his passengers at illegal docks, and then speed back to New Jersey before the sheriffs could catch him and serve him with papers.
Wow.
He used to hide in a secret compartment on the boat to avoid being arrested. And he flew a flag on his ship, a big banner.
The famous flag, New Jersey must be free.
New Jersey must be free? It was brilliant marketing. It was political theater. But it wasn't just a stunt. He was the one who pushed his boss, Gibbons, to fight this all the way to the Supreme Court.
And they hire the best lawyer in the country.
They hired Daniel Webster. And this legal battle becomes the landmark case of Gibbons v. Ogden in 1824.
And for those of us who maybe slept through constitutional law class, why is this case such a big deal?
It's a huge deal because the Supreme Court, under Chief Justice John Marshall, ruled that the federal government, not the individual states, had the authority to regulate interstate commerce.
Ah,
It completely invalidated New York's monopoly. It blew the waterways wide open for competition. So Vanderbilt didn't just win a business fight. He fundamentally changed the structure of the American economy. He made the free market for transportation actually free.
and he gets rich off of it.
He gets very rich off of it. But the thing that always strikes me about the Commodore is that he wasn't just a boats guy. He was a logistics visionary. You see it again and again, like with the Nicaragua adventure.
Oh, this story is like something out of an action movie.
Right. So it's the California Gold Rush, 1849. Everyone on the East Coast is trying to get to San Francisco to strike it rich.
Okay.
And you have a few options. You can go overland in a covered wagon and probably die of cholera, or you can take a ship all the way down and around the tip of South America, which takes months.
So the shortcut was key.
The shortcut was everything. The established route was through Panama. You'd sail to Panama, cross the isthmus by land, and then catch another ship up to California.
Makes sense.
But Vanderbilt pulls out a map, and he sees that Nicaragua is actually closer. It's a more direct route. So he personally goes down there. And remember, he's a rich man now. He doesn't have to do this. He's sailing up the San Juan River, personally mapping the rapids, jumping off the boat to tie ropes to trees to physically drag the steamer over the shallows.
He's engineering the route himself.
By hand. And he creates this route part riverboat, part stagecoach, that is 2 days faster and way cheaper than the Panama route. He completely crushed his competition.
It's that same pattern. Find the bottleneck, break it open, and then charge everyone a toll to use your new, better way.
That was his entire playbook, but then we get to what I think is the defining move of his entire career, the Great Pivot.
This is where he's the undisputed king of shipping. His fleet is everywhere.
Mm.
And then he just stops.
It's an unbelievable move. It would be like if Jeff Bezos in the late 90s had said, you know what, this internet bookstore thing is cute, but I'm selling it all to go into, I don't know, heavy manufacturing.
It's that big of a shift.
It's massive. Vanderbilt looks at the American landscape in the 1860s during the Civil War, and he realizes that the future isn't water, it's iron, it's railroads. So he starts systematically selling off his ships, his entire beloved fleet, and pours every dollar into railroads.
And he doesn't just buy a little stock here and there. He goes to war.
He wages total war. He starts by buying up these small, disconnected rail lines in and around New York and consolidating them into one powerful entity. But in doing so, he runs into some very, very serious enemies. Which brings us to the Erie War.
This is where he almost gets taken down.
He absolutely meets his match, and his opponents are two of the most notorious figures of the era, Jay Gould and Jim Fisk.
The ultimate robber barons.
If Vanderbilt was a pirate, these guys were something else. Jay Gould was a financial mastermind, maybe the only man in America who was more cunning than Vanderbilt. So Vanderbilt decides he wants to take control of the Erie Railroad. He starts buying up all the stock on the open market, a classic hostile takeover.
Standard procedure.
But Gould and Fisk, who control the railroad, have an ace up their sleeve. They have a printing press in the basement of the Erie Railroad offices.
A literal physical printing press.
A literal printing press. And every time Cornelius Vanderbilt's brokers bought, say, 10,000 shares of Erie stock, Gould and Fisk would just print 10,000 brand new illegal counterfeit shares.
It's called watering the stock, right?
Right, exactly. Vanderbilt was shoveling millions and millions of dollars into a bottomless hole. He was buying paper that was being created out of thin air just moments before.
How is that not just blatant fraud?
Oh, it was completely illegal. But the judges and politicians in New York were all in the pockets. They had bribed everyone. Eventually, Gould and Fisk had to flee to New Jersey with all the corporate records and suitcases stuffed with Vanderbilt's cash. They holed up in a hotel surrounded by hired thugs.
This is incredible.
And Vanderbilt, to his credit, eventually realized he'd been beaten. He lost millions. But, and this is the key to his success, he knew when to cut his losses. He made a deal, got some of his money back, and he refocused on building his own empire, the New York Central Railroad.
The New York Central. That becomes the backbone of his fortune.
It becomes the jugular vein of the American economy.
Well.
It was the water level route connecting New York City to Chicago. It was the most efficient, most powerful railroad in the country. That railroad is what took him from being a simple multimillionaire and turned him into the wealthiest man in the world.
So by the time he dies, 1877, his fortune is estimated at what, $100 million?
About $100 million, yes. In an era with no income tax, when a skilled factory worker might make $1 or $2 a day.
It's just, The scale is impossible to comprehend.
To try and put it in perspective, that $100 million represented roughly 1 out of every $20 in circulation in the entire United States.
Yeah.
At times, he personally held more currency than the U.S. Treasury.
And yet, for all that wealth and power, he was a strange man. He was deeply into spiritualism, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He was a devotee. He held seances in his home. He claimed he consulted with the spirits of the dead for business advice.
Wow.
And he was famously almost pathologically stingy. He lived in a pretty modest brownstone on Washington Place. He didn't care about art or music or high society. He didn't care about impressing people. All he cared about was winning.
And when he died, he left almost all of that incredible fortune to just one of his sons.
Yes.
Which brings us to the next chapter, William Henry Vanderbilt. The Commodore had, 13 children? But he basically cut almost all of them out of the will. Why?
He had this deep-seated belief that to divide the fortune was to destroy its power. He didn't want to create a big family of comfortable trust fund babies. He wanted to found a dynasty with a clear line of succession like a king.
And he picked William Henry. But he didn't even like him for most of his life, did he?
He famously couldn't stand him. He called him a blockhead, a blatherskate. He thought William was slow and lacked ambition. For years, he essentially exiled him to a farm on Staten Island, basically daring him to see if he could even make that profitable.
That's a pretty tough performance review from your dad. Go farm potatoes, you idiot.
It's brutal, but this is where the story takes a turn. Because William Henry shocked his father. He took that farm and, through careful management, turned it into a huge profit center. And slowly, grudgingly, the Commodore started to respect him.
So when the old man dies, William Henry gets about 95% of the estate.
95%. The rest of the children got comparatively tiny sums. And here's the part of the Vanderbilt saga that almost always gets overlooked.
What's that?
William Henry Vanderbilt is the only heir who actually increased the family fortune. And he didn't just increase it. He was arguably a better, more systematic businessman than his father.
Better than the Commodore. That's a bold claim.
Well, just look at the numbers. It took the Commodore a lifetime of 60 years in business to build that $100 million fortune.
Right.
William Henry inherited it and doubled it in just 8 years.
He doubled it.
Doubled it. He took it from $100 million to nearly $200 million before he died in 1885. He expanded the railroad empire. He streamlined the operations. He professionalized everything.
But he's also the source of that infamous quote, "The public be damned."
Yes. Probably one of the most famously misquoted lines in the history of American business.
How so? What's the real story?
A freelance reporter was pestering him, following him, badgering him about why he had canceled a particular fast mail train. And the reporter kept saying, "But aren't you running it for the public benefit?" And William Henry, who was just exhausted and annoyed, finally snapped at him. He said, "The public be damned. I am running it to benefit the shareholders."
Which, to be honest, is exactly what every CEO in the world thinks today, even if they're smart enough not to say it out loud to a reporter.
Precisely. But when it appeared in print, it was just the first 4 words. The public be damned. It made him sound like this monstrously arrogant tycoon. It cemented the image of the Vanderbilts as these greedy robber barons.
And you think that backlash had an effect on the next generation?
I think that public relations disaster is a huge part of what pushed the 3rd generation to try and buy respectability, to launder the family name.
So this is the major pivot point in the family's story. William Henry dies suddenly in 1885. He just drops dead in his office, and the money passes down to his sons.
And this is the moment. The making money phase of the Vanderbilt dynasty is officially over. The spending money phase is about to begin in the most spectacular way imaginable.
And a lot of that is driven by one person in particular who wasn't even born a Vanderbilt.
You cannot tell the story without talking about Alva Vanderbilt. Alva Erskine Smith. She married William Kissam Vanderbilt, one of William Henry's sons. She was a force of nature, just an absolute titan of will. She came from a respectable Southern family that had lost all its money in the Civil War, and she came to New York with one goal.
To conquer it.
To conquer New York society, absolutely. But there was a problem. New York society didn't want the Vanderbilts.
Why not? They were the richest family in the country.
That was the problem. They were new money. The gatekeeper of New York's elite, the so-called 400, was Caroline Astor, the Mrs. Astor.
Right.
And to Mrs. Astor, who came from old Dutch Knickerbocker stock, the Vanderbilts were just vulgar, They were descended from a ferryman. They'd made their money in sweaty, dirty things like railroads. She simply refused to acknowledge their existence.
So how did Alva break through that wall? Because we know she did.
She won with one of the most brilliant, ruthless social maneuvers in American history, the Great Vanderbilt Ball of 1883.
Okay, set the scene.
Alva and her husband had just built a brand new, spectacular mansion on Fifth Avenue, the Petit Chateau. To celebrate, Alva announced she was throwing the most lavish, most expensive costume ball New York had ever seen. The whole city was buzzing. Everyone who was anyone was desperate for an invitation.
Including the Astors.
Including Mrs. Astor's own daughter, Carrie. Carrie and her friends had been practicing a special cotillion dance for weeks. They had their costumes all planned.
And then Alva springs the trap.
She springs the trap. She lets it be known through the society pages that, unfortunately, she couldn't possibly send an invitation to dear Miss Astor because her mother, Mrs. Astor, had never formally paid a social call on the Vanderbilt home. And you can't invite someone to your home if you've never been properly introduced.
It's just magnificently cold.
It was a nuclear weapon.
Right.
Carrie Astor was supposedly in tears, absolutely devastated. And Mrs. Astor, faced with her own daughter's social humiliation, had to surrender. She swallowed her pride, ordered her carriage, and drove to Alva Vanderbilt's new mansion to leave her calling card.
The gate was opened.
The gate was stormed. The Vanderbilts were officially in.
And once they were in, they didn't just join society. They decided to remake it in their own image. Which leads us to what some people call the edifice complex.
It's the perfect term for it. This wasn't just about building nice houses. This was something else entirely.
What was it then?
It was an attempt to use architecture to buy legitimacy, to create physical proof that they were the American equivalent of European royalty. So they stopped building American houses. They started importing European history, stone by stone. They built French chateaus and Italian palazzos all over the eastern seaboard.
The sheer scale of it is just staggering. Let's just run through the greatest hits of the portfolio. Start with the head of the family, Cornelius Vanderbilt II.
Okay, so Cornelius II, William Henry's eldest son, he builds the family's main New York residence at 1 West 57th Street. To this day, it is the largest private home ever built in New York City.
How big are we talking?
154 rooms.
154 rooms.
Yeah.
In the middle of Manhattan. I can't even begin to process the logistics of that.
It occupied the entire block front on Fifth Avenue between 57th and 58th Street. But you have to remember, that was just his house for the winter social season.
Right, because you need a summer place.
For the summer, he had his little cottage up in Newport, Rhode Island.
The Breakers. And calling the Breakers a cottage is the ultimate billionaire humble brag.
It really is. It's a 70-room Italian Renaissance palazzo modeled on the palaces of Genoa and Turin. He had entire teams of Italian artisans brought over to do the carving and the stonework. The walls of the music room were gilded with platinum leaf because gold was considered too common.
Platinum leaf.
The whole point of a house like the Breakers was to overwhelm you. When you walked in, you were supposed to feel small. You were meant to feel the immense, crushing weight of Vanderbilt power and money.
But his brother, William Kissam Alva's husband, he wasn't going to be outdone, was he?
No. Down the street in Newport, he built Marble House. And Marble House is fascinating because it was really Alva's masterpiece.
Her project.
Completely. It cost $11 million in 1892, which is, what, over $300 million today? $7 million of that was just for the marble.
$7 million on marble.
She was buying it from quarries in Africa and Italy in cubic yards. The house was basically a temple to her own social victory.
But even these incredible houses, they all get overshadowed by what the youngest brother did.
Ah, yes. George Washington Vanderbilt II. He has to be the undisputed champion of the Vanderbilt building contest.
And he doesn't build in New York or Newport. He goes down to Asheville, North Carolina.
He goes to the mountains of North Carolina, and he builds Biltmore.
And Biltmore is just, it's in a different category from everything else.
It's in a different universe. It is a 250-room French Renaissance chateau. It has 175,000 square feet of floor space. To this day, it is the largest private home in the United States.
175,000 square feet, that's 4 acres. You have a 4-acre house.
And it wasn't just a house. George created a feudal estate. He bought up 125,000 acres of surrounding forest and farmland. He built an entire village for the estate workers. He started the first managed forestry program in the country.
He sounds different from his brothers.
He was. George wasn't really a businessman. He was a quiet, scholarly, romantic figure. He read hundreds of books a year. He wanted to create this kind of self-sustaining intellectual utopia in the Blue Ridge Mountains. He hired the absolute best talent in the world to do it. The architect was Richard Morris Hunt,
Who built all the other Vanderbilt houses.
right. And for the grounds, he hired Frederick Law Olmsted.
The genius who designed Central Park in New York.
The very same. So you have the greatest architect and the greatest landscape architect in America working together on one single project. The result is breathtaking.
It sounds beautiful. But as you're describing it, it also sounds like an economic black hole, just a machine for burning cash.
That is exactly what it was. And this highlights the fundamental shift in the family. The Commodore made money. William Henry made money. This third generation, Cornelius II, Willie K., George, they didn't make money, they spent it.
And spending it on this scale is unsustainable.
The annual maintenance costs on a place like Biltmore were astronomical. You needed a literal army of servants just to keep the place dusted and heated. It was a financial drain from the moment it was finished.
Which brings us inevitably to the beginning of the fall.
Sure.
But before the money completely runs out, they did manage to leave a mark on American culture that went way beyond just real estate.
Oh, absolutely. The cultural footprint is surprisingly deep and varied, and often in areas you would never expect.
Like what?
Okay, take Harold Sterling Vanderbilt, great-grandson of the Commodore. He was a world-class sportsman, a competitive yachtsman. He successfully defended the America's Cup 3 times.
The highest prize in sailing.
The highest prize. But his most lasting contribution to the world. He invented the modern scoring system for the card game contract bridge.
You're kidding. So every time my grandparents play bridge at their club,
They are using a set of rules and a scoring system designed by a Vanderbilt, probably while he was sitting on the deck of his yacht. He wanted to make the game more scientific, more balanced. It's that Vanderbilt mind again, always looking for a better, more efficient system.
that's amazing. Who else?
Well, you have to talk about Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney.
The art patron.
And a sculptor in her own right. She was the family's bohemian, a real free spirit, and she became a passionate collector of modern American art.
At a time when that wasn't fashionable.
It was the opposite of fashionable. The art establishment, the big museums like the Metropolitan Museum of Art, they thought contemporary American art was basically trash. They only wanted European old masters.
So what did you do?
She put together this incredible collection of over 500 works by living American artists, and she offered to donate the entire collection to the Met.
And they turned her down.
They turned her down flat. So Gertrude, in true Vanderbilt fashion, basically said, fine, if you won't show this art, I'll start my own museum. And in 1931, she founded the Whitney Museum of American Art.
It's that same family trait again. You won't let me in your club. I'll build my own bigger, better club, just like the Commodore with the steamboats.
It's exactly the same impulse. And we can't forget the story of Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt and the Lusitania.
Right. We always associate rich people and sinking ships with the Titanic. But the big Vanderbilt tragedy was on the Lusitania.
That's right. Alfred was actually booked to sail on the Titanic's maiden voyage in 1912.
No way.
Yep. But he canceled his trip at the very last minute, so his luck held out for a few more years. But it ran out in 1915. He was a passenger on the RMS Lusitania when it was torpedoed by a German U-boat.
And the stories of his actions during the sinking are just incredible.
They're incredibly heroic. By all accounts, he was completely calm. He wasn't scrambling for a lifeboat for himself. He was moving through the chaos, helping women and children, finding life jackets for them.
And he gave his own away, didn't he?
The most famous story is that he saw a woman holding a baby who didn't have a life belt, so he took his own off and gave it to her, saying, "You need this more than I do." He knew perfectly well that he couldn't swim. He went down with the ship.
It's such a powerful image. The heir to this great robber baron fortune dying as this selfless, chivalrous hero.
It is.
But his death, in a way, is a single event. Let's talk about the systemic decline, the fall of the House of Vanderbilt, as the book calls it. How does a fortune this enormous actually vanish? It can't just be from building too many big houses.
The spending was a huge part of it, for sure. But the structural economic changes in the country were the real killers. There were 3 major blows that the Vanderbilt fortune was just not built to withstand.
No. That's the first one?
The income tax.
Right. In the Commodore's day, there was no such thing.
It was 0. You kept every dollar you made. Then, in 1913, the 16th Amendment is ratified. And for the first time, the federal government has the right to tax personal income. Suddenly, a slice of everything coming in is going to Washington.
And then came the inheritance tax.
Exactly. The estate tax. That was the real dagger. Every time a wealthy Vanderbilt died and passed the fortune to the next generation, the government would swoop in and take a massive chunk at its peak. The tax rate was over 70%.
70%.
So if your fortune is mostly tied up in things you can't easily sell, like mansions and art and railroad stock, you have to start liquidating assets just to pay the tax bill.
Okay, so taxes are the first killer. What's the second?
The Great Depression. It just devastated the value of their primary asset, which was railroad stocks. The New York Central, the golden goose that had laid all these golden eggs for 2 generations, it suddenly stopped paying dividends. The stock price collapsed.
And the third blow.
Simple dilution. The Commodore had a lot of kids, but he funneled the money to one son to keep it concentrated. William Henry split it mainly between 2 sons. But after that, the families just got bigger and bigger. By the time you get to the 4th and 5th generations, you have dozens, then hundreds of descendants.
So even if the original fortune had stayed intact, it was being divided into smaller and smaller pieces.
Exactly. If you divide $200 million by 200 people, everyone is still very, very rich by normal standards. But you're not build your own palace rich anymore. You're just country club membership and a nice summer home, comfortable.
And this all leads to what I think is the saddest chapter in the whole story, at least from an architectural perspective. The Great Demolition.
It's heartbreaking if you care about historic preservation. By the 1920s, and certainly by the 1940s, those gigantic Fifth Avenue mansions were just white elephants.
Obsolete.
Completely obsolete. No one could afford the army of servants needed to run them. The property taxes were crushing. And most importantly, the land they were sitting on was suddenly worth far more than the houses themselves.
So they were torn down.
One by one, they came down. Cornelius II's 154-room palace, demolished in 1927. Alva's beautiful petit chateau, demolished. 10 grand Vanderbilt mansions once stood on Fifth Avenue. By the mid-20th century, almost all of them were gone.
They really did pave paradise and put up a department store.
Literally. The luxury department store Bergdorf Goodman stands on the exact spot where the Cornelius Vanderbilt II mansion used to be. The physical legacy of the family's greatest triumph in New York City was just wiped off the map in a single generation.
But the bloodline obviously survived. And the family adapted. It evolved. Which brings us to the modern era. And this is where this story, I think, actually gets inspiring again.
I agree. Because the modern Vanderbilts that we know of are not idle, dissolute heirs.
No. They're working professionals. And the most famous example, of course, is Anderson Cooper.
Anderson Cooper, the son of Gloria Vanderbilt.
And Gloria's a whole fascinating story on her own. The poor little rich girl at the center of that insane custody battle in the 30s, who then reinvents herself as an artist and a fashion icon with her designer jeans.
A true survivor. But her son, Anderson, made a very conscious decision early on not to rely on his family name or any potential inheritance. He went into journalism the hard way. He was a war correspondent. He built his entire career on his own credibility.
And he's talked about this publicly. He said his mom, Gloria, told him from a young age, there is no trust fund.
Right.
And he said he was grateful for it because it forced him to have that hustle, that drive.
It's almost like it comes full circle back to the Commodore's original energy, that relentless hustle. And he's not the only one. You've got Timothy Olyphant, the actor.
Wait a minute. Timothy Olyphant from Justified and Deadwood is a Vanderbilt.
He is. He's a great-great-great-grandson of the Commodore. He descends through one of the daughters, Emily Vanderbilt Sloan.
I had no idea.
But again, think about it. He's a working actor. He's out there grinding, auditioning, building a career based on his talent. He's not living off a trust.
And then, if you want to find one of the great Vanderbilt houses that's still a private residence, you have to go to England.
You have to go to Blenheim Palace. This is the whole dollar princess phenomenon.
I'll blame that.
In the late 19th century, you had all these American industrial fortunes, but the families lacked aristocratic titles. And in Britain, you had all these aristocrats with ancient titles but no cash, so they started making deals.
A marriage market.
An international marriage market. And Alva Vanderbilt, in her ultimate quest for social status, essentially forced her daughter, Consuelo, to marry the 9th Duke of Marlborough.
A famously unhappy marriage.
Miserable. Consuelo apparently cried walking down the aisle, but her dowry, which was millions and millions of Vanderbilt Railroad stock dollars, is what saved Blenheim Palace from ruin. It literally repaired the roof and modernized the estate. So the current Duke of Marlborough, who lives there today, is a direct descendant of Consuelo Vanderbilt.
So the Vanderbilt money might be gone from Fifth Avenue, but it's still keeping the lights on in one of England's greatest stately homes.
That's exactly right.
Okay, before we get to our final thoughts, I want to clear up one common misconception. Amy Vanderbilt, the expert on etiquette.
Oh, yes. The name is so perfect, everyone just assumes she must have been at the center of it all, writing down the rules.
Right.
She was a Vanderbilt, but she was a distant cousin. She descended from the Commodore's uncle or brother, not from the main line of the family that held the great fortune.
So she had the name, but not the money.
Exactly. Which, in a funny way, probably made her the perfect person to write books about etiquette. She was observing high society from the edge, not from the center of the ballroom. She had perspective.
So if we pull back and look at the whole 400-year arc, what do we see? We see this incredible rise from the mud of a Dutch colony.
The explosion of industrial wealth on a scale never before seen.
Is this fit of architectural madness.
And then the inevitable slow pull of economic gravity, bringing it all back down to earth.
It's a journey from what, robber baron to builder to patron of the arts to celebrity.
And finally, to citizen. The Vanderbilts we know today are citizens. They're journalists and actors and writers. They are part of the American fabric, but they no longer own the whole cloth.
And that really brings us to the big question to leave everyone with today, the final provocative thought.
It's a question about the nature of legacy, really.
Go on.
The third generation of Vanderbilts spent the modern equivalent of billions of dollars trying to immortalize themselves in stone and marble. They built houses that were meant to stand for 1,000 years, like European castles.
And most of them were gone in 50 or 60 years.
Gone without a trace. But what are the Vanderbilt legacies that actually lasted?
Vanderbilt University in Nashville.
Still going strong.
The Whitney Museum in New York.
One of the world's great cultural institutions.
The game of bridge.
Played by millions of people every day. So the question to think about is this. If you were fortunate enough to build something massive, a huge fortune, how would you try to make it last? How would you try to cheat death?
Would you build a monument? Something physical, with your name carved on it in big letters that demands attention.
Or would you invest that wealth in an institution, an idea, a piece of culture, something that might not look as impressive from the street, but that actually lives on in the minds and lives of people generation after generation?
Because stone crumbles, palaces get torn down, but an idea can be timeless. Something to think about next time you're on Fifth Avenue, walking past a department store, and you wonder what used to be there.
Indeed.
That's our deep dive on the House of Vanderbilt. Thanks for joining us.
See you next time.